Hi and welcome back. Now let's look at a much more practical approach to layers, and we'll just talk about how you use them in the real world and why they're so important. So remember when we took that cappuccino mug and we dropped it onto here? Let me just expand this a little bit. Scroll in using Alt and the scroll. And I'm going to go grab the cappuccino and drop it in there again. There it is. I've already selected it using the quick selection tool, and I'm on the move tool now, which remember is V on your keyboard. I'm going to left click it, drag it up to this, bring it back down, and release the mouse. Then I'm going to go Control T to transform it. Gets these transform controls, and if I hit Shift and click and drag, I can make it smaller. Again, on your version, you may have to hit Shift or you may have to just click and drag. Slide it down like that. And then remember, we hit Enter to lock it in. And remember then we went to our background layer and we got our brush and we painted under here. Okay, well this is where layers become important, because what we didn't do was work non-destructively. We painted right onto our background and essentially then damaged our original image. And if we were to have saved that, then we would lose our original image. That's called working destructively. We want to work non-destructively. So instead of painting right onto our background, we want to make another layer that we can work on and basically destroy or mar, if you will, and leave this one preserved and leave it locked. Okay? So the way we do that is really simple. We'll just left click on this background, drag it down to this little icon right now. It looks like a piece of paper with a folded edge, and once you're hovering over it, it will turn to a hand and we release. And here, let me close this out so you can see better. Now it says background copy right here. Okay, so now we can leave this one alone and we can do our edits to this. And if we ever decide we hate this whole scenario, which, let's be honest, it's a little bit surreal, then we could just hide these layers, save this as is, or do other edits to it, or delete these by grabbing them and dropping them in the trash can like that, and we're back to our normal layer, okay? So now that I've deleted it, let me bring it back one more time. Again, make a copy of the background. There it is. We've got our cappuccino mug. And now we're going to do our brushing on the copy of the background. So again, I hit B, got my little brush, and I'll just do a little brushing, maybe a little more, not go too crazy. And you can even see it if you look closely on this little thumbnail that I have the shadow painted onto this background. In fact, if I hide the mug, there it is. If I hide this background that I've essentially damaged, there's our original still there, okay? The way we had to do things in the old days was we had to save a separate copy of whatever we were doing edits on so that we could preserve the original. So I would have my original barnedits.jpg, and then I would open this one, bring in my cappuccino mug, put in my shadow, and then I would do a save as, which if you remember is Control Alt S, if I can find it on my keyboard. And then I would rename this to, barn with field and cappuccino mug or whatever. So that way I didn't mess up my original. And sometimes you may still want to do that if you're feeling extra paranoid. But now we have layers. And so now you can have this layer preserved and locked and working on new layers. And you'll always still have the same old original right there in your file. And it's just a lot easier. That's not the only benefit of layers. As you can see, with layers, we're able to take this cappuccino mug and lay it on top, lay some shadows underneath it, and that's just the tip of the iceberg for what you're able to do with layers. And just to give you a quick example, if I wanted to make a completely white background and just have this cappuccino mug sitting on its own, I could create what's called an adjustment layer, and we'll go into more detail on these later. This is just an introduction. And by the way, for this video, you don't have to follow along. You can just enjoy yourself, sit back, have a cappuccino, and watch. So this is where we do a new layer, right? If you want to do an adjustment layer, you go to this icon here, And actually it's best if you click off of your layers, go to this icon here and click it, and you'll see all of these options. And we'll go into the most important ones of these, like brightness and contrast and curves, which is also how you adjust brightness and contrast and color. We'll go into hue and saturation. So in other words, if I wanted to make this a warmer color or a cooler color, more red, more blue, you can adjust that in here. But what we're looking for to make a solid background is a solid color right here. So we click on this. It brings us to our color picker, and now you can pick whatever background color you want. And you can go up this range here, which is the rainbow. Basically has all of your reds, blues, greens, yellows, oranges, and back to red. Purple's in there. And you can click these to pick your general color family. And then on here, it goes from bright at the top to dark at the bottom, and no color at the left. You can see all these are gray, to very rich, saturated color on the right. You can see these are very yellow. So if I want a dark, rich yellow, I'm going to click over here. If I want a dark, really washed out, grayish yellow, I'm going to click over here, and you can see I have to kind of actually go this way to even get any color. If I want a very light, bright yellow, I'd go up here. And if I want a very light, if I want a light but muted yellow, I'm going to go up here. And if I want a light but very bright color of yellow, then I'll go over here. And by bright, I mean intense color, okay? We'll talk about this more too, but let's see. So I wanted to do a white background. So I can either go up to this very top left corner and carefully select white from there, and you have to get right in the corner to get it to be exactly white. Or even easier is I can go down to this hashtag code, and these are web color codes, and I can just highlight this and type in FFF FFF, and that gives me pure white. Then I click OK, and you can see I've created this new layer that's all white. Problem is, it's on top of my cappuccino layer. If you recall, we can reorder these layers, right? So I'm going to grab this layer. Don't want to click on these because this is where your adjustments were made. You want to click over here right on the layer. You also can't click on the text because it'll try to rename itself if you double click. But you want to click over here, click, grab, drag gently until your blue line pops below the cappuccino layer, release, and now our cappuccino is on a white background. You'll also notice if I zoom in, hit the letter Z, and I can zoom in, you'll also notice that we're seeing a lot more imperfections in our cropping. So that's something we would want to clean up on a white background. Now if we want to go do our shadow, probably zoom back out just a tiny bit, Alt and click and press the space bar and move it to the center just to make it easier to work with. We're going to click on this layer, go to the brush tool, which is B. Actually we need to be in here, and then we'll just brush a little here, maybe once more. And we've got our shadow back. And by the way, the reason that the shadow doesn't show up on the coffee mug is that we're painting on the layer beneath it. So this is sitting on top of that. If I toggle this off, you'll see the shadow actually goes up underneath the mug. And I'll show you this too. If I turn off this, if we Control Alt Z and undo all of that shadow, and I go onto my coffee cup layer by clicking on it, if I go in with my brush tool, do you think that it's going to go underneath the rim of the cup or on top of the rim of the cup? Remember, I'm selected on this layer, and this layer is sitting on top of everything else. So if I brush, watch what happens. Now I'm brushing right on this layer. And another thing to keep in mind is this coffee cup layer is not just the coffee cup that we cut out and dragged over here. It's this entire layer. The pixels behind it, as you can see from the little thumbnail, are just transparent. These little checkered gray and white checkers are just showing that these pixels or these parts of this image are just transparent, so you can see through them. But we still have this entire sheet of plastic, if you will, from our previous analogy, that's accepting the color, right? So we'll go ahead and Control Alt Z. On a Mac, you're going to go Command Option Z and undo all that. And you would want to click on your fill layer where you filled it with white and brush underneath. And I'm clicking the mouse and releasing. Remember, I have my opacity set to 30. If it's not set to 30, you might want to reset it. I have the hardness set to very soft, which means just basically you have blurry edges. If I have it set up here, it's going to make this really sharp edge, which looks kind of weird. And then we just click and drag, release the mouse, and then click and drag some more to make that little shadow. And then if we decided we didn't want it on a white background anymore, and actually let's go Control 0 so we can see the whole image, then we could either hide this like that, and we'll be back onto our background copy, or we could delete this whole thing. Just click and drag it into the garbage, and now it's gone. Okay, so that's just a little bit more about layers and a little light introduction to adjustment layers. In the next several videos, we're going to get deeper into adjustment layers so that you can really start to take an image maybe that doesn't have good color, doesn't have good lighting, and use adjustment layers, maybe even along with a selection like your quick select tool, and adjust the image to give it pop, give it brightness, give it contrast, whatever it needs to look great. Okay? So you're doing a great job, and I am really proud of you, and I am grateful to have you along for this ride, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture.